Thank you for tuning in to the Postmodern Realities podcast, brought to you by the Christian Research Institute and the Christian Research Journal. I'm Melanie Cogdill, Managing Editor of the Christian Research Journal. It's July 2024, and you're listening to episode 399, which is a conversation about TikTok dancers, cult allegations, and the Netflix docuseries Dancing for the Devil. On this episode, I'm joined by Lindsey Medenwaldt, who is Director of Ministry Operations at Mama Bear Apologetics, and she serves as a consulting editor for the Christian Research Journal. Lindsey has a master's in apologetics and ethics from Denver Seminary, a JD from St. Mary's School of Law, and a master's in public administration from Midwestern State University. This episode is a little different than our normal. It is just a conversation, and there's no article on our website attached to it.
Lindsey, it's good to have you on the podcast again.
Hey, Melanie, so glad to be back.
Well, this is going to be something a little different from the norm because we are going to have an episode where we don't have a specific article tied to it, but Lindsey has written a number of articles that are adjacent to this. Most recently, her article on a docuseries about people in what we call the love cult. So we will link that in the show notes so that you can read that and see some of the things that we're going to talk about here. But you might be wondering why I just said that we're going to be talking about a Netflix docuseries on some Instagram and TikTok dancers. And here at the Christian Research Journal, we cover cultural apologetics because these days really influences in our culture have to do with movies and television and social media way more than books. Unfortunately, that's kind of, we're in a video image driven phase of our culture right now, and it's just so big. And that's pretty much how people get, information about their favorite actors and people online, especially teenagers. So that's what we're concerned about today when we talk about this Netflix docuseries, Dancing for the Devil. There is a group of dancers that are super popular on both TikTok and Instagram with millions of followers, one with almost 10 million followers, almost 9 million, so closer to 10 million followers. And so many kids and young people are really enthralled with these dancers in our culture. And there's so many shows, reality shows, whether it's Dance Moms or whether it's So You Think You Can Dance or even The World of Dance, where these reality shows have made some of these dancers big stars. Well, this Netflix documentary that we're going to talk about with the 3 episodes a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, was the #1 show that's watched. And we just want to talk about some of these dancers and their involvement in a religious group that is alleged in this docuseries. And then finally, we're going to end up our conversation talking about why this should matter, why parents should be aware of this, and also young people too, because it's so easy to get caught up in social media accounts and be interested in the same things that you think your favorite movie star or social media personality is interested in. And that's how kind of the term is now, influencers. So these people do influence us, whether it's our beliefs or the products that they are promoting or any number of things that it's kind of big, right, these days. And I will say that certain religious trends that we covered back at the Christian Research Institute in the 80s that were big in the 70s and 80s have seen a resurgence due to social media. And that would be, Lindsey has covered for us, witch talk. So witchcraft is big again. And tarot cards. That seems like hippies in the 1960s and 70s, but it's big again because of social media. So we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into using this particular series kind of as an example to talk about some bigger issues in terms of what Christians should have their radar up about and why we need to look for things that are truly Christian and hold to Christian orthodoxy. And just because sometimes people throw terms around like I love Jesus or I love God, what does that really mean? So Lindsey, let's get going. Before this documentary, did you even know about any of these TikTok dancers?
Yeah, I think I was probably living under a rock, Melanie, because I didn't really know about any of these dancers. When I started doing a little bit more digging, I perhaps knew about some of the old school ones from So You Think You Can Dance and World of Dance even. And I was familiar with some of the forms of dancing that they talked about in the documentary, such as crumping, which became famous, in the early 90s. But yeah, I was I was unaware of just how influential dancers can be on TikTok and Instagram. I am no longer unaware, and I'm keeping my eye out on some of the messages that are being sent, because truly as a parent, you could think that it's okay for your kids to be watching or following certain people on Instagram. Dancing seems safe. They're not posting vulgar things. They're not using even bad songs. In fact, this dance cult uses, alleged dance cult, I guess we should say, uses old school music and some of the top 10 songs from many decades. And so some parents might be tempted to just say, yeah, it's okay. You can watch all of those dancers. But the reality is what kind of messaging are they getting through these dancers? And in some cases, as we've seen with this documentary, it might not be all great and might not be the things that we want our kids to be exposed to.
I was looking at our reviews on Apple Podcasts for Postmodern Realities to see if we had any new reviews, because I note every episode that when we get new reviews, it's really helping us out with the algorithm so that people can find this podcast. But I just noticed that we only have 2 reviews for all of 2024. We got one in April, and then we got one last month on the 1st of June. So I would like to ask all of you that download this podcast, because there's a lot of you, and less than half of our 84 reviews are written ones. So would you please do us a solid favor and write us a review in the next week? And, it seems that Apple Podcasts is the best place to put those reviews. So if you could take your time, that'd be a big gift for us. And just think of 2 short sentences. Why do you think people should subscribe to this podcast, listen to this podcast? How would that help them out as a Christian in their faith and in their growth in their faith? So that's something that I'd like to ask. The other thing is, I've mentioned every episode lately that you can give us a tip, like $3 or $5 or $10, because we don't have a subscription anymore. Everything is completely not under paywall, and you are getting 52 new articles every year because every week we have a new article going up. Now, for example, this week, you didn't hear me mention an article that goes with this episode because there isn't one, but we do have an article that is going up that's brand new. It's never been published anywhere else, and it is an article by Dr. Douglas Groothuis, and it's part of his cultural critique column that he does for us every other month. And so it's a brand new in-depth article, and so go to our website, equip.org, equip.org, and it's right there at the very top of the website. So it's a brand new article and it's completely free. And so the reason why we would like you to give us a tip and think about it, considering it, is if you're enjoying all this content, if we take your tip and combine it with many others like you that want to support our content, then, altogether that makes a difference for our budget, because although things are free on the internet, we believe that our writers need to be paid. They don't work for free for us. We do pay them for their very good work and research. So those are just some things to consider for us as we head into the big milestone next week of episode 400. I can't believe it. It's been 8 years, 400 episodes. Well, now back to my conversation about the hot Netflix docu-series Dancing for the Devil about TikTok dancers involved in an alleged religious cult. And just some of the different things that Lindsey and I are talking about and that we think parents really need to know about, because it is really important because so many young people are on social media. So now back to my conversation with Lindsey.
Well, I will say that I was familiar with all of these dancers and how I...
You're so trendy.
Well, actually, I grew up taking many years of ballet, more than a decade. And so I have dance in my background and I love dancing. And I don't really follow that many dancers. But I think, like you mentioned, what I liked about these particular dancers in comparison with the really well-known dancers, primarily from the Los Angeles area dance scene that are known worldwide, is that they, like you said, they had clean music and they had cool style. And, I looked at their bio years ago. This was many years ago, and it said God first, and so some of the things that are actually shown in this documentary, I actually saw on my feed in real time when it happened, like when two of the dancers got engaged. I noticed that they were engaged because it was one of their posts. At first, I thought it was just some kind of setup film, but then I realized it was a real event that was happening. They were getting engaged. And I also will say that I'm sure a lot of Christians have their kids, especially their girls, in dance lessons. And as I said, the dance community is very small. And some of these dancers now, because they're social media influencers, they're famous worldwide. So what they do is a lot of them go and teach classes all around the world. So this is why it's really influential. It's like you will see young kids, girls, boys as young as 10, 11, 12 years old, paying a lot of money to take huge mass dance classes in their local city from these very famous dancers. And that's why I think parents need to pay attention, because they're not going to know. They're going to be like, oh, my kid wants to take a $25 dance class from this famous person. Why not? I will go to the hotel in my town and it's a TikTok dancer and they can take a class. So I would have never have thought of religion and dance and cultic behavior all wrapped up together. But I will say, I found out about the docuseries when I noticed some of the comments going a little wild on one of the dancers, Miranda Derrick's account. I don't follow all the dancers in her group, but just a couple. And I did notice a few years ago that they only dance with each other. They do not dance with a lot of the other luminary people in the LA dance scene, which I thought was really interesting. And so, like you said, they just had a very clean account and not like a lot of hip hop music and dance music has a lot of raunchy lyrics. And so they didn't have that. So it makes them, interesting. Like, oh, if I want to follow a dancer, let's follow this clean one. So let's talk about this group specifically for a minute. They are involved in a church led by a specific pastor that's mentioned in this documentary. So who is this pastor? What is his background? And how is he involved in, being a part of these dancers' lives?
Yeah, so the documentary makes a lot of claims. It opens with a young woman named Melanie who is talking about her sister, Miranda. They were influencers together on the dance scene for a while there and had lived in LA together. And then all of a sudden, Miranda started hanging out with a group of people that were kind of taking her away from her sister. And Melanie said, well, what's going on? Where are you going? Who are you spending your time with? And she said, oh, you should come to church with me. And so she ended up going to this dinner with Miranda. And we learn in the documentary about what kind of happened in that. And that's kind of our first exposure to this person named Robert Shin, who is the founder and seems to be the pastor of Shekinah Church in Los Angeles. Now, I want to let listeners know that there are a couple of different Shekinah churches, and a couple of them are in California. So searching it on the internet is probably actually not going to yield you the correct one. It seems like they maybe have taken down their website because of this documentary. But if you look at the records, the tax records, Shekinah Church does exist in LA and it is run by Robert Shin. So it does seem like the documentary is correct when it mentions him. Now, it also seems like he owns a lot of different businesses. from real estate companies to financial companies, and then a management company, a dance company. It's actually called 7M Films. And it seems like he's in charge. And I'm not really quite sure how it came to pass, Melanie. So in the documentary, it talks about how there were several dancers who had gotten involved with Shekinah Church. And they were sort of talking about how they had bad management, how they weren't getting very many gigs, how many of them were still living in their cars, or they were poor and unable to eat. And Robert said, well, what happens if I just manage you? Let's do that. And lo and behold, we've got the 7M Films management company, and many of the dancers who had been attending the church are now represented by 7M. This includes Miranda Derrick. Her sister, Melanie, did not ever join the group, gave many warnings to her sister, said, please don't join the group. She ended up joining the group, married another member of the group. That's the engagement I think you were talking about. And it's interesting to hear about Robert Shin from some of the former members. They talk about how he was sort of untouchable. There were mentors below him that would kind of speak to him, and then they would relay the information to the dancers. And of course, he would lead Sunday sermons or other sermons that they attended. But pleasing the pastor was really important, or is really important, because he's a man of God. And in order to please God, you have to please the man of God, which later we'll find out that language can be really dangerous in a group like this one. But some of the former dancers have described Shin as somebody who love bombs people really well. So he will feed them tons of compliments about how great of a dancer they are or how much money they're making. I mean, there's recordings of him announcing at church some of the different dance deals that the dancers have gotten, and even the amount of money they're bringing in. And so there's that. And by love bombing, these dancers who in some cases are just looking for somebody to love them as an artist, that can be really, really effective to bring them in. So yeah, that's a little bit about Robert Shin. His history kind of goes a lot further back than, recent history. The documentary sort of touches on that briefly, and we might get into that later. But essentially, he's a pastor who also leads a management company and also owns several other businesses in California.
I will say this, that preparing for this podcast, I found out some things that I thought were really interesting. One is that one of the executive producers is Tim Milgram. And Tim Milgram is really known for his company called T Millie Creative. And he does like all the dance videos that people are, featured, all the main big dancers in the Los Angeles area, a lot of them associated with Millennium Dance Studio, although he has his own dance studio now, but he has done so many dance videos and reels for social media for a lot of big choreographers. So that's kind of how he's known, which is really interesting that I found out that prior to the creation of 7M Management Company, I was noticing on all of these kids' videos that the producer, like the video was done by Isaiah Shin. I'm like, who's Isaiah Shin? I've never heard of him. And then it looped back to 7M. This is my Christian Research Institute CRI nerdy like research instincts, which is why I'm just like on social media for fun. And I don't follow a ton of people, but it's just like, oh, well, I've never heard of 7M. What is that? This is way before this documentary came out, many years. And so just come to find out in researching this conversation is that Isaiah Shin used to be a videographer for Tim Milgram, which is very fascinating because the videos that are produced are very slick that they put up on TikTok and Instagram. So that's probably his videographer skills that he learned under Tim Milgram. But then he broke away to start 7M production company. So I think it's interesting that Tim Milgram himself has been quoted in different articles saying he was concerned for this group that these dancers were in. And so he signed on to be a part of this documentary as a producer. So you mentioned that they're part of Shekinah Church, and we did have the disclaimer that there are various Shekinah churches. But is this a regular, like Christian, Protestant, or evangelical church?
Not that we can tell. No. It's pegged as a non-denominational church that was founded in 1994. That is the information I was able to glean from the internet. Everything else kind of comes from media outlets or former members who are talking about their experiences. But that is literally what I was able to find. Like you, I sort of am a person who loves to do research and dig. And I kept hitting roadblock after roadblock when I was trying to research Shekinah Church with regard to Robert Shinn's Shekinah Church. We do know that they have some Pentecostal roots, perhaps. I mean, Shekinah, after all, does mean divine presence. And so you're thinking, okay, what do they mean by that? They definitely believe in the gift of the Holy Spirit through the speaking of tongues. They talk some about healings, although I wasn't able to find like a specific instance where somebody was necessarily healed or claimed to be healed. Robert Shinn, in some of the recordings that are released through the documentary, does claim that healings are possible, and that there was even somebody featured on the documentary who claimed that she thinks she got better, and that's why she joined the church from some ailment that she had after being with Robert Shinn and learning from him. They also believe, it seems like health and wealth is a big deal for them, prosperity gospel. So if you listen to some of the teachings, Robert Shinn talks a lot about giving a lot so that you get a lot. And so he's talking about tithing. He's talking about taking care of the pastor and the pastor's wife. In order to benefit and reap good things in your life, you have to do good things for God and the man of God. And so that's used a lot in some of the recordings that you can find of Robert Shinn. And then there was this situation where people were talking, maybe for a good 15 minutes on one of the sessions, was about dying to self, which is taking scripture and twisting it with regard to Shekinah. What it really means is shunning your family from your own self. So they are asked to cut themselves away from their families and friends. Even in one example, one of the dancers was told that he needed to die to his son. And his son seemed like he was a toddler at the time. So really, really young son, and told to sort of cut him off. And that was sort of the beginning of the end for that dancer. That dancer eventually left the group. But so they are asked to give up their families or leave their families. We see that in other examples, like Miranda Derrick, who has sort of cut off her family, except it's a little confusing when you look at her socials, because sometimes you do see images of family on her sister's page and her parents' page. So we're not real clear what that means exactly, but they are encouraged to do everything in their own group and stick together. So they live together, they dance together, they go to church together, and it is a really closed group. That's what we know. We don't know a whole lot because they're very secretive. It's an invite-only church, I guess, too. That's really important to note. You can't just walk into the church and expect to be able to attend. You have to receive an invitation.
And that should be a warning, because church is somewhere that we would invite people in, especially if they're not Christians. So if it's a specific church that's saying you need their specific invitation, that should give Christians pause about that, because churches should be places that are open, that are welcoming people into the life of the church and to know who Christ is if they are seekers. And so that is interesting. And it is also like behind like gates. I don't think you can get, I mean, I'm sure there are other churches that might have to be gated for various reasons, but I don't think you can just decide, oh, I want to attend this church on Sunday.
Yeah, you have to push a button and be let in.
Yes, that is very unusual. So he is the owner of this 7M Films that we mentioned. It's a talent management company. And I think basically all they're managing right now is this little cadre of dancers on TikTok and Instagram. And are the dancers that he represents, are they required to go to Shekinah Church?
Yeah, it seems like it. It seems like it's a strong encouragement that they are given to attend Shekinah. They are invited in, And then I think they're expected to stay. Of course, the documentary features former members. And so they're giving their own experiences about what it meant to be a dancer with 7M and also go to church. One of them, I think it was Concrete, who said that it was basically expected of him that he would go to church. And for him, he was like, I grew up in the church, so it makes sense for me to go to church. What have I got to lose? But then the bombs sort of begin to drop because they are encouraged to tithe, which is not unusual. Churches encourage people to tithe, and you should tithe to your local church. But then you should also give this portion of your income directly to the pastor, or you should give this part of your income to support this part of the church. And one dancer even alleged that at times he was giving up to 70% of his income to Shekinah and the pastor. And that is a huge cut for dancers who already aren't making a lot of money and then forking over all of their money to this church because they're told if they give much, they will receive much. One of the former dancers actually said they were seeing this happen though, because they were being told they were going to be blessed and then they would get more jobs or they would see an increase in the number of followers they had. And the pastor, Robert, would stand up on the stage at church on Sunday and say, see, I told you this was going to happen. Now keep giving me your money and you're going to keep being blessed. And unfortunately, we see that other things were happening behind the scenes, allegedly, that were not so positive. They were not being blessed in other aspects of their lives, even though they were maybe given a place to stay and given food to eat. And you're right, the videos are produced really well. It puts these dancers in the best light. And they're very, very professional looking. They've got great costumes and great choreography. And there's no surprise to me why these TikTokers, these dancers are so famous because their dances do look good. And now that I think about it, I've seen teenagers emulate these, right? Like they stand in the bathroom and they make up dances or they're copying the dances that they see on TikTok. These are the dancers creating those dances that your teenagers are doing in their own videos. So it truly is influential. But yeah, I think there is this, I don't know if it's an unspoken rule or a spoken rule, but if you are involved with 7M, you are probably also involved with Shekinah.
So some of the other things that are alleged by former members don't follow under our purview of thinking about sound doctrine. So we're not going to be discussing any of those allegations in this podcast because they're not really relevant to our discussion of religious beliefs. But what are some of the general concerns about the group and the parents of these former dancers that are in this docuseries? So we have the Wilkings and also the parents of a guy named Reno, who is featured in a lot of the different videos, dancing videos. Now, since the documentary came out, we read in news media accounts that he deleted all of his social media, so I could not see anything further since the actual documentary came out, but they were using that platform, his parents, to try to speak out to him. And then there are former dancers. You mentioned one of them, Aubrey Fisher, and his former girlfriend, Kylie Douglas, who was also in the group. And as a matter of fact, I don't follow them, but I noticed they were suddenly gone from all of the content and they had always been there. So I kind of, went down the rabbit hole. It was maybe a year and a half ago or so, and then figured out they had broken up and they're not dancing together with these people. And I didn't know why. Now that the documentary came out, they used to be in this same church group. And also, I think prior we found out some other interesting information that some of the people, specifically James Derrick, who had been involved with, and Concrete, who's no longer in the Shekinah group, that they had been dancing together way back into 2017, 2018, around then, and were on the World of Dance. Now they're estranged from each other because Concrete left the Shekinah group. But they used to be part of a Christian church that had some similar views to Shekinah. Is that right?
Yeah, it seems like it. Again, there's just so much information and not that much information, depending on where you're looking and how you're trying to research. It does seem like they were part of a church group together, and it seems to have similar threads as the Shekinah group. Of course, we're not talking about their former group necessarily for this podcast, but it seems like they may have jumped from one group to another, and there are similar teachings involved in both situations. With Shekinah and Shin, some of the concerns are obviously addressed on the docuseries, and listeners can go and watch that and learn more. But really what the listeners need to take away about this group is that it is a tight control group. And what I mean by that is once you are a member of Shekinah, they basically control your life. They tell you where you're going on what day. So that would be part of the management company side of things, where, if you have a publicist or somebody who manages you, they tell you what your schedule is that day, and that's what you do. If today's a dance day, you're going to go to this location and you're going to dance 15 dances that are going to be, put on the socials, that kind of thing. But they also control where they live, who they live with. So Shin apparently owns several homes or rents several homes, and the dancers live in those homes. And they control their food intake and all of that other, the things that they wear. Even the music that they dance to seems to be controlled by Robert Shin. And, there are other accusations made against Shin by some of the former members that, the courts are going to handle those. But what we really are concerned about is this group being so controlling of these young members. And they are young. Most of them are in their 20s, and they join at a young age where they're vulnerable and looking for success, and they want to be discovered. And Shin and Shekinah and 7M seem to offer them what they're looking for. And so they join, and in some cases they have stayed.
I know that in the few clips of his preaching that were presented in the docuseries, what he was saying to me did not seem like biblical teaching. It was very just commentary about things that were going on towards them, things that people were saying online. And it was really odd to me. The other thing, too, of course, this is all alleged, even though they show you documents in the docuseries, is that people should have pause if you're attending a church where they say, if you're giving to our church, please personally make out your check to our pastor, or here's our pastor's Venmo, give him money directly. That is not how any, upright, law-abiding church usually is operating. It's usually a nonprofit organization that you're donating to them. It's not just a tight-knit family. And it seemed like it was a few of his followers, his wife, his son. That's Isaiah Shin, who is doing the actual videography of the dancing. So that should be a red flag if you're making your tithing check directly to any member of your pastor's family.
And some of the allegations by some of the former members is that their accounts were actually being controlled by the Shins or those representing the Shins. That is another concern, right? Like beyond orthodoxy, and you could say, well, that was the management side of things. Well, okay, but they're also making the members sign their checks ahead of time, and that's a separate civil allegation, and the courts will deal with that. But that is a sign that you need to take pause. If your church is asking for your checking account and they're going to control it, you should maybe find some advice about what that would mean if they did that.
So I think then the question for people that are following it, because there's still they still have all those followers. And at one point, Miranda Derrick's comments were selected. It says that there are only certain few that are available to be seen. But now she opened her comments back up, or whoever is, posts on her social media, opened the comments back up. That's a new development in the last week or so. But what do you think might be a reason for these dancers to stay in the group? Now, I will say that if they have made statements, they haven't made any statements about the theology or Pastor Robert Shin or anything like that. They have just made kind of general comments about some of the allegations in the documentary, or themselves saying we are subpoenaed for some of this in civil litigation. That might be some of the financial things, so we can say nothing. But it doesn't seem like some of them have distanced themselves at all from the group, and they have doubled down. So why do you think that is happening? In fact, Miranda Derrick did speak out against the documentary. I had noticed she hadn't posted in a while, and now I knew we were doing this podcast, and I noticed that she did do a post. And so I looked at it, and she basically spoke out against the documentary in specific. So why do you think that's happening right now?
Well, like I said, it's tight control, right? And when you have a group like this, it's damage control at this point, because this documentary, you could say it's one-sided in that it's former members and none of the current members chose to speak on it. They always have that line at the end of series like this is, we reached out for comment and nobody responded. And so it is one-sided in that it is only presenting the view of former members or people who've been, or family members who currently have family members who are in the group. But when we're looking at those things, it shows that it's not easy to leave if you are somebody who came from nothing and this group has given you a platform, or at least in your mind, the group has given you a platform. Former member Aubrey Fisher even talks about this, right? He says that, he was not well cared for before finding this group. And then all of a sudden he joins the group and he is no longer living in his car and he's paying the bills and he's got money coming in. And yeah, he's tithing a lot, but he's also making money. And for him, he's got a social media platform that's being built. And for dancers, it is all about what is the next thing that I can be on. They were getting spots on World of Dance or, all the other reality shows that feature dancers, or like you said, getting opportunities to teach. That's a big deal. Commercials, they're making money and they're doing better than they were before. And when you have the pastor telling you that that's going to continue and that your family members just don't understand, and we shouldn't worry about what your family members say. They just don't know what it is we're doing here. And they don't have your best interest in mind. When you start hearing that, you're thinking, oh, right, my family doesn't understand. I've got a good thing here. Everything this guy says is going to happen happens because look at me, I'm making money and I'm dancing and I'm living the dream. Why would you leave? When we're looking specifically at Miranda Derrick, right? She's married now and she and her husband are featured prominently in videos by this group. And, they're always together and it's a big boost for your self-esteem if you're getting the likes and you're getting the follows and people seem concerned about your well-being. But, it's unfortunate because when we hear from the former members and they're reflecting on their experiences, they then say things like, I was lied to, or it wasn't worth it, or I was manipulated, that they've been damaged forever and that they have to get therapy or whatever it is to help them recover from their experiences. And then you realize that just because you've got a beautiful thing going on social media, it doesn't necessarily reflect what's really happening in the real world.
So I think I want to shift to a more general discussion about these kinds of groups, because you were just talking about some of the experiences of one of the dancers, Aubrey Fisher, who left the group. And how can we protect ourselves? You have done something on a love cult, and that involved older adults that were lured in by different promises from this couple of finding their perfect love match. So how can we protect ourselves from religious groups that want to take advantage of people or even abuse them financially or otherwise? And what are some safeguards can we put in place? Because I think this is really important for parents to think about. I mentioned dance lessons. I mean, the majority of young girls at one point in life have dance lessons. And in Miranda Derrick's case, she started dance when she was 2 years old, and she just grew up loving dance. And she decided, I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to go to LA to pursue her dancing career. And then all of a sudden, she was on the reality dance show, So You Think You Can Dance. But all of a sudden now she's 27 years old and she's been featured in this documentary that she might be in some kind of cultic type of group. So how do parents really have their wits about them? Because we hear so many backstories of kids whose parents were there and they just I didn't see the signs. I didn't know someone was grooming my kid to one day, abuse them or something like that. So also parents might be like, oh, this person's going to give my kid a break. And look, their other clients have, more than 8 million followers on TikTok. So what are some of the things that should be safeguards for Christians?
Yeah, I've got daughters in dance, and I definitely am keeping my eyes out for things at this point. But yeah, for parents, watching a documentary like this can be really disheartening and a little scary because we wonder if it could happen to our kids. When you look at Miranda's parents, and they saw the signs early on, it seems like, after she left for LA and then she started not spending time with her sister, and they were asking questions, and it seems like they did the best they could to navigate that. They went so far as to even show up and try to rescue her, and it didn't work. She wouldn't come out. But I think we have to think about who is influencing us and who is influencing our children. You need to know who your kids follow on social media. It has to be a regular occurrence for you to check their social media feeds. You have to know who they're watching, who they're liking, who they're engaging with, what videos are they commenting on. If you're going to allow your child or your teenager to have social media, you need to be in control of that social media. You have the right as a parent to check it and to be aware of those things. Be aware of who's influencing you as well. What YouTube videos do you watch? What television shows do you watch? What are you putting into your mind and allowing yourself to consume? What should be primary in a Christian home is making the Bible and church a priority. I fear that our culture is not headed in that direction. We are skewing away from that. We're skewing away from families discipling their own children. We're expecting the church to do it in the 1 hour they have them a week, and that is not going to work. You need to be engaging with your children about what they are watching and what they're learning. And you need to go through scripture with your kids. You are not going to recognize false gospel, false doctrine, if you don't know the true gospel, the true doctrine. Pray for your kids. Old school lessons were walk into your kids' room at night and lay hands on them and pray for them. Go back to that. We should be praying for our kids regularly and be engaged with God about protecting our kids physically and spiritually and emotionally and mentally. If your older kid starts talking about a group they want to join, whether it's dance or otherwise, ask them questions and then listen. Listen well. Listen for key words. What kind of group are they describing? What does the group do? Know the warning signs. Know what to look for. If they're joining a new church, or if you're joining a new church, what does their statement of faith say? Usually a church has a statement of faith on its website. Look at it. Meet with the pastor. Talk to the pastor about what the organization looks like. Who does the pastor report to? What does the elder system look like? You should know who they say Jesus is. What are the Christian essentials that the church adheres to? If you don't know that about your church, you need to find out. And if it doesn't align with Christian orthodoxy, it might be time for you to find a new church. These are warning signs for groups like the one we talked about, as well as other groups throughout the country that we wouldn't necessarily consider cults, but that would reflect unorthodox Christianity. Just because someone says that they believe in God or they thank God in an awards speech, it does not mean they are a Christian. We have to be careful about assigning that label to athletes or famous people, influencers, especially with our kids. We need to train our kids to be able to spot that. If you hear, we've got the Olympics coming up, there's going to be lots of things or lots of athletes thanking God. When you hear that and you're watching with your kids, you should say something like, now, does that mean that person is a Christian necessarily? And have a conversation about what that means. It's really important. So those are some ideas. Obviously, every situation is different and unique, but be aware, I guess, of who you're following, who your kids are following, and talk about it regularly.
I think those are such important considerations and really good advice for parents, because as part of cultural apologetics is to know what they're watching. If everyone's watching it or everyone's following this certain person, why are they doing that? As a matter of fact, this is just to say how popular things become for even middle schoolers when social media is involved. As a matter of fact, I was reading an article in the New York Times on skincare, and they were saying the amount of 14-year-olds and 13-year-olds that are selling out companies that are one specific company that has some cream to have, you wouldn't have any wrinkles, and being, having a firm, your face is firmed up and you don't have any wrinkles. And the thing that was so scary is that 13-year-olds don't have wrinkles. And the fact
Right.
that they are selling it out, and they asked some of these 13 and 14-year-olds, they're like, well, everyone at school has it. I really love the smell of this. And so they were talking about how these kids are going into Sephora and having their mom buy them hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of, anti-aging products. And, the fact that 13 and 14-year-olds are worried about anti-aging things where they barely started puberty is a little disconcerting. So I just want to say that even if it's something as simple as this lotion or this face serum, kids are really influenced by social media. So you should be very careful of what they're doing, or they might maybe lead you to Sephora and say, buy me these $100 worth of anti-aging products. So what happens if we have a family member involved in a group like this, or even a kid that suddenly has a fascination with anti-aging products at 13? How do we handle that? Is there anything we can do as a parent or as a grandparent?
Yeah, I think it varies person to person, but it seems like the overarching response to that is try to keep the lines of communication open. We see that in the documentary, right? We see family members trying to keep that line of communication open, even if they have to promise never to bring up the group while they're together. They're just desperately trying to hang on and be in their kids' lives as much as possible. So when that day comes, if they want to leave the group, they're there. There are also different perspectives as far as, what you should do if your son or daughter is involved in a group like this. Some say that you can't just deny the truth and pretend like it doesn't exist. You have to allow yourself to speak honestly to your kid. But honestly, you know your child best. You know who they were before they joined the group, or before they started talking about spending hundreds of dollars on skincare products. I can't even imagine. That's a lot of money. But this idea that you should just try one thing. No, try various things. If you try one avenue of trying to talk to your kid about this and it doesn't work, try a different avenue, or maybe just take them out for coffee and don't talk about it, and continue to keep that bridge open rather than burning it. Now, the other thing, and I mentioned this already, is prayer. I think it's such an underrated thing, Melanie. We as a culture have stopped praying, and we should be praying now, I think, more than ever, when it comes to our kids, when it comes to our families, when it comes to protecting our marriages. There are so many things that we need to be in prayer for as Christians. Do not think that God has given up on your kid. We see instances in scripture. I'm thinking of the prodigal son, for example, where they go off for a time and then they come home. Be the parent who welcomes them home with open arms. But in the meantime, continue to pray and pray that God will put other people in their lives who can witness to them, who can offer them real hope and real salvation. And it's not placed in the material things of this world, like we find in this group featured in the documentary, where it's all about likes and looking good and dancing well. No, this is about eternity and hope for your kid in eternity. So don't despair so much that you've forgotten to pray and you've forgotten to remind yourself of the hope within you.
So this is a big question for you. Should Christians continue to follow these dancers? Because that's a question for me. I watched this documentary and I was very, very troubled. That was an understatement. Again, it's a one-sided thing, so I just don't really know. You can't really know everything involved. Is it true at this point? But should you continue to follow the dancers? I just follow one of them. Well, let's see, do I follow her, B Dash? I don't believe I follow B Dash, just Miranda. She's the only one I follow and have followed for years, but they're all linked into there's only a few core of them. They're all tagged in each one of the posts. So I've been able to see who they were. What are the benefits or downsides of, having them in our social feeds? And as I said, for at the moment, I kept following her because I knew we were doing this podcast, but I don't know. I'm very conflicted because I just feel like I don't know if these allegations are true, but if they are true, they're very troubling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For listeners, B Dash is married to Miranda. I don't know that we explicitly mentioned that.
Yes, that's his dancer name. A lot of these dancers have like different names that they take on, like the guy Concrete. That's not his actual real name. It's Concrete. But B Dash, that's his dancer name. He's James Derrick is his actual real name.
Yes. So, okay. This is going to be up to the individual person. And I know that is maybe a cop-out answer, but hear me on this. Okay. So if you were going to continue to follow dancers who are part of this group, I guess you could ask yourself why. If you can answer that question with, maybe they're the best dancers, or maybe you learned something for them, or maybe you want to keep the connection open, maybe have other, as a Christian, you want to follow them just in case. I don't know, are you going to have an opportunity to witness to them? Maybe now because her comments are open again. But I guess asking yourself why can get you a long way on that one. And you should ask yourself that for everybody you follow. Why are you following them? Our lives are so full of information already, and we're following so many people. Does it really make an impact in your life if you lose the one? Probably not. Maybe it does. Ask yourself why. I will say that a former member, Kylie Douglas, she addressed this on Instagram. She was saying that for her, when you follow one of the dancers, it actually indicates that you're accepting them. And I guess as Robert would explain it to them, it's acceptance of him as well. So she actually has encouraged people to stop following the dancers who are involved with Shekinah and 7M, because then the message will be lack of blessing, right? So if they are being told that they're giving all of this money and they're going to continue to receive blessings, and now they've received this huge influx of followers because of the documentary or whatever, you have to think about what kind of messaging that is sending to them. And the way Kylie explained it is you're actually sending them the wrong message when you choose to follow them. And when you unfollow them, that's the correct message, because it's telling them that something is wrong or off with what's happening. Now, of course, Robert could turn around and say, well, we're experiencing loss because of, Satan's trying to destroy us and we have to persevere. But that's where you have to really think about, what is your purpose in following particular people, whether they're the dancers in Shekinah or, dancers anywhere, or, any artist or actor that you choose to follow. Why are you doing it? What's the purpose, and what's the benefit for you? Or is it just making more noise in your life? That's a good, serious question to consider.
I will say I noticed for Miranda Derrick that before the documentary, she probably had about 1.1 or 1.2 million followers. And then now she has 1.7. So I think 500,000 people decided to follow her, unless she bought a whole bunch of followers just to be like, what's up with this girl? I'm going to follow her. I thought it was really interesting because her husband always had more followers and he's gone down. He has less followers now, but it's all relative when you have, in the hundreds of thousands or millions of followers. But I've noticed that her followers have suddenly gone up. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. So yeah, that's a good word to think through. Who are we following and why are we following them and why are we on social media? So how can Christians respond when we hear about groups like this one? And is there anything practical we can do about such groups?
Yeah, that's the question of the day, right? The more we see companies like Netflix and Prime Video creating docuseries about these kinds of groups that exist, I think we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to respond as a Christian? I would say don't be afraid to talk about it with other people. So, I had a friend text me about this group, and that's how I found out about it. And I've since, shared with my other friends about it. And now we're having a whole podcast about it. So we're talking about it because we're keeping the information flowing. We're asking questions about the group that we need to consider. And the more that we can keep the information flowing, we see this with other groups as well, it makes it less likely that there will be new converts. Right. So if they're only hearing the one side, or if they're only hearing or seeing the success of the dancers, and then the dancers are inviting them to church with them, if there's not the opposite voice available, it's more likely somebody will come to church with them and be taken in by the group. So yeah, I'm all for free flow of information. I think it works for all sorts of groups, big or small. As Christians, I've already mentioned this, but we really, really need to read the word. It seems like such a basic thing as a Christian that you would read the Bible, but we really need to be doing it, because once we've equipped ourselves with the word, we're much more likely to spot the falsehood. You can listen to a few video clips, the few that have been made available, and your discernment radar should go off about Robert Shin, that something is not quite right in what's being taught in Shekinah. We don't see a statement of faith for the church, so it's hard to say exactly what they believe. But in the few videos or recordings that have been released, it doesn't seem to align with Orthodox Christianity. And if you're in the word and you know the word, you'll be able to spot it. If you can't spot it, ask a friend, hey, does this sound right? Ask a Christian friend to help you figure it out. And then that final piece, and I think I say it every single podcast that I'm on with you, Melanie, is that we need to be praying. Equip yourself with the armor of God. Recognize that we are in a spiritual battle, a real spiritual battle. We are fighting against false ideas. We're not fighting against people. It's these false ideas that have inhabited our culture, that are inhabiting the children in our own homes. And God has given us the ability to equip ourselves against those things. And we can ask for help in the paraclete of the Holy Spirit. So yeah, those are just a couple of things that I think Christians should do. Should you watch these kinds of documentaries? We've talked about that topic before. I don't think that it's a bad thing to watch them, but don't watch merely for entertainment purposes or to get your kicks. Instead, watch to learn and to understand what other groups are believing and teaching.
And even though this has a lot of favorite social media influencer dancers in it, so that might be the car crash factor, I would highly caution parents. I don't think this is a documentary or docuseries for anyone that's like, I don't know, they'd have to be at least 17, a senior in high school. It's just because there is trigger warning for sexual abuse and there is language. So I would definitely caution parents, and they should see it first before even watching it. I just don't know that it's appropriate for viewing of kids. So, well, finally, on a much lighter note, I mentioned that I grew up taking dance lessons. So I want to ask Lindsey, did you grow up going to dance lessons as a kid?
I did not. I took a year of ballet in high school.
Well, it sounds like your kids are taking some dance lessons. So now I guess vicariously you're taking them through the dance experience. Well, thanks, Lindsey, for being a guest again on the Postmodern Realities podcast and helping us think through how we should respond to the lives of social media influencers that we see sometimes almost daily on Instagram and TikTok feeds.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Melanie.
You've been listening to episode 399 of the Postmodern Realities podcast. Today's guest was Lindsey Medenwaldt, and she is one of our consulting editors for the Christian Research Journal. We've been having a conversation about the Netflix docuseries Dancing for the Devil, and linked in the show notes, we will have some links to other articles along the same lines as this conversation that have been written for the Christian Research Journal by Lindsey and available at our website, equip.org. That's EQUIP.org.
You won't want to miss out on subscribing to the other podcasts from the Christian Research Institute. We have the Bible Answer Man podcast, which is published Monday through Friday with the best of the week on Saturday. It's hosted by CRI President Hank Hanegraaff and is available wherever you get your favorite podcasts. In addition, Hank has a podcast called Hank Unplugged. Hank takes you out of the studio and into his study to engage in free-flowing, essential Christian conversations on critical issues with some of the most interesting, informative, and inspirational people on the planet. And you won't want to miss out on the brand new podcast from the Christian Research Journal. Christian Research Journal Reads presents audio versions of Christian Research Journal articles. It was a print incarnation of almost 45 years. It's now on the web, as you know, with new articles every single week. So you won't want to miss these audio articles of some of our most popular and most accessed articles, on our website, equip.org.